I remember the quiet more than the pain, the beeping monitors, the faint smell of antiseptic, and the empty chair by my bedside. That chair should have been filled. My name is Harold Bennett. I am 72 years old, a retired structural engineer, and a widower of 15 years. I've spent a lifetime solving problems, building bridges both on paper and in people's lives. When my wife, Ruth, passed, I swore I'd hold the family together. I raised our 2 children, Michael and Linda, with everything I had left. I thought I'd done well, until that week in the hospital proved otherwise. I hadn't expected to end up there. One morning, after shoveling snow off the driveway, a tightness gripped my chest like a vice. It wasn't dramatic. No collapse on the sidewalk, no flashing lights right away. Just a slow suffocation, a heavy weight that made me sweat and clutch at my ribs. The neighbors insisted on calling an ambulance, and before I knew it, I was lying in a sterile white room under the glare of fluorescent lights, doctors muttering about blockages and surgery. The first night wasn't so bad. Nurses checked in, cheerful despite the late hour. One of them, a young woman named Emily, reminded me of my daughter in her 20s, back when Linda still laughed easily and didn't look at me like I was a burden. The staff reassured me, but I kept glancing at my phone, expecting a message, a call, anything from my children. I'd texted them both. At County General. Surgery tomorrow. Don't worry, I'll be fine. No reply that night. The surgery itself went smoothly, or so they said. A stent placed, arteries cleared, the kind of miracle medicine you thank God for. When I opened my eyes, groggy and sore, the first thing I saw was the same empty chair. I told myself it was early, maybe they were arranging rides or stuck at work. Hours passed, visiting hours ended. Still, nothing. It's a strange kind of loneliness, lying in a hospital bed with tubes in your arms, knowing the people you gave decades to can't spare a few minutes. I remembered Ruth's face in moments like that. She used to say, "Harold, you give too much. One day you'll find there's nothing left for yourself." I never believed her. I thought family meant reciprocity, that love given would come back when I needed it most. By the second day, reality pressed harder than the ache in my chest. I scrolled through social media out of habit, and there they were, Michael posting pictures at a brewery with friends, Linda smiling at some charity gala in a glittering gown. They weren't too busy. They were choosing not to be there. A nurse adjusted my IV and asked gently, "No visitors today, Mr. Bennett?" Her kindness made the absence cut deeper. I forced a smile and said, "They'll come." But inside, I knew. Something had shifted in my family long before this hospital stay, and I'd been too blind, or perhaps too hopeful, to admit it. That night, I tried calling Linda. She answered on the third ring, her voice clipped. "Dad, I can't talk long. I'm about to head into a meeting." "Sweetheart, I just wanted to hear your voice." Well, I'm through the surgery, but it would be nice to see you." She sighed. "We're slammed this week, Dad. Maybe next weekend. Just focus on resting." Before I could respond, the line clicked dead. The following morning, Michael texted, "Busy with work and kids. Karen says hospitals aren't good for the little ones anyway." "Rest up, Dad." I stared at the message until the letters blurred. That empty chair became more than a piece of furniture. It was a verdict. I am not a man prone to theatrics. In my career, precision mattered. Measure twice, cut once. No room for miscalculation. But this abandonment, it wasn't a miscalculation on their part. It was deliberate. A slow withdrawal from me, disguised as busyness, until one day they could justify being absent altogether. As the days stretched on, my body healed faster than my heart. The doctors were pleased with my recovery, but inside, resentment brewed. Not the hot kind that bursts out in anger, but the cold, deliberate kind that sharpens the mind. When you're left alone to face mortality, you start seeing truths with painful clarity. I realized I had been clinging to an illusion. That blood was enough to bind loyalty. But here I was, in one of the most vulnerable moments of my life, and the people I'd built everything for had turned their backs. I didn't know it then, but that empty chair was the beginning, the proof that my children weren't just absent. They were waiting for me to grow weaker, to fade quietly, so they could swoop in and claim what they believed was theirs. And when I finally understood that truth, I knew I couldn't let them win. When I came home after Ruth's funeral 15 years ago, I told myself my job as a father was done. I had raised Michael and Linda into adulthood, seen them both married, and given them the foundation Ruth and I had worked so hard to build. From that point forward, I thought my role was simply to be present. Holidays, birthdays, the occasional babysitting weekend with the grandkids. I imagined we would be close, the kind of family that checked in on each other just because. But looking back, I see the cracks had been forming for years. Michael, my eldest, was always ambitious but reckless. He went into real estate without much of a plan, buying and flipping houses with money borrowed from banks, and sometimes from me. I loaned him tens of thousands when he was younger, telling myself it was helping him get started. He promised to pay me back. He never did. When I pressed him once, he said, "Dad, it's family. Don't be petty about money." He said it with a smile, but it left a bruise. His wife, Karen, only reinforced that attitude. She had a sharp tongue, and though she was polite at first, her true opinions slipped out in moments of frustration. "Your father's house is too big for him alone. One day it'll be better for us to manage it." She thought I didn't hear. I did. Linda, on the other hand, married into wealth. Her husband, Victor, is a corporate lawyer, and together they live in a gated community where everything gleams. Linda has always been polished, composed, but since her marriage, she began treating me less like her father and more like some distant obligation. When I called her house one evening, Victor answered and said, "We're entertaining tonight, Harold. Could you call another time?" It was subtle, but the message was clear. My presence was not welcome in their carefully curated life. Even so, I excused them. They were busy. They had lives of their own. I told myself not to be selfish, that children grow up and priorities shift. But the hospital stripped away all those excuses. On my third night there, the loneliness was eating at me, and I tried again. I called Linda. This time she answered with irritation in her voice. "Dad, I told you I'm slammed. I have 3 client meetings tomorrow, and Victor's flying out. I can't just drop everything." "Linda, I'm not asking for the world," I said, my voice breaking more than I intended. "Just an hour of your time. I'd like to see my daughter's face." There was a pause, then a cold reply. "Dad, don't guilt me. You'll be fine. I'll come when things settle down." She hung up. Later that same night, Michael sent a text. No call, just words on a screen. "Busy with work and kids, Dad. Karen says it's best you rest anyway. Hospitals are depressing places. We'll swing by when you're discharged." I stared at that message, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was bargaining for scraps of affection. 2 days later, I finally saw Michael, though not in the way I'd hoped. He dropped by for 10 rushed minutes, Karen in tow, both of them standing by the door as though afraid to sit. I asked softly, "Could you stay a little longer? Maybe have dinner with me in the cafeteria?" Karen wrinkled her nose. "Hospitals aren't exactly where I want to spend my evening, Harold. Besides, the kids need us home," Michael added quickly. "Yeah, Dad, we're slammed. Just hang in there, all right? We'll plan something soon." I looked at him. The boy I once carried on my shoulders at baseball games, the man I had lent money to without question, and I barely recognized him. The visit ended with Karen tugging at his arm, hurrying him along. That was the first confrontation, though not in raised voices or dramatic accusations. It was quieter than that, deadlier, because in that sterile hospital room I finally saw the truth. My children weren't too busy. They weren't protecting their time. They were protecting their distance. And that distance wasn't just emotional. I began to sense there was something more, something tied, not to love, but to what I owned, to what would one day be left behind. Their absence wasn't neglect. It was calculation. When Karen muttered under her breath, "Better if we just wait this out," I felt the chill of betrayal settle into my bones. I lay back in that bed, staring at the ceiling, my chest aching not from surgery but from realization. My family wasn't just abandoning me. They were waiting for me to disappear. And in that moment, I made a silent vow. If they were counting on my weakness, they were going to be gravely disappointed. I used to think betrayal came in sharp blows, a shouted argument, a slammed door, the sting of words you can't take back. But the kind that cut me in that hospital came softer, disguised in whispers and casual remarks, until it revealed its full shape like a shadow creeping across the floor. It happened late in the week, after another routine check by the doctors. I was sitting upright, grateful for the strength returning to my body. Michael had finally shown up again, but only because Karen insisted she needed to check something with him. They lingered near the window while I sipped at my lukewarm tea, pretending not to listen. But when you live alone long enough, your ears sharpen. Karen's voice, low and annoyed. "Honestly, it's depressing here. Better if we keep our distance. He'll be discharged soon enough, and the inheritance will sort itself out." Michael mumbled something, too soft for me to catch, but Karen pressed on. "You worry too much. He's stubborn. Let him think he's in control. When the time comes, the house, the accounts, it'll all fall to us anyway. Just smile and nod." I froze, teacup trembling in my hand. The words didn't sting. They seared. The inheritance will sort itself out. I had spent decades believing family was built on love and loyalty, but in that moment I realized my children, and especially the woman Michael married, saw me as a ledger, not a father. Michael turned then, catching my eyes for the briefest second. He must have known I'd heard, but instead of shame, I saw calculation in his face. He walked over, patting my shoulder like he was checking a box. "Rest up, Dad. We'll take care of things," I nodded, swallowing the anger that clawed its way up my throat. Outwardly, I remained calm. Inwardly, something shifted. I was no longer just a patient waiting to heal. I was a man with clarity. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I stared at the ceiling, Ruth's face flashing in my memory. She had warned me once, after Michael borrowed money for the third time. "Harold, he's using you. Don't blind yourself to it just because he's your son." I brushed it off then, insisting Michael just needed guidance. Now, with Ruth gone, I saw how right she'd been. I thought of Linda, too, her clipped tone on the phone, the way Victor had spoken for her as if I were some intruder in their perfect suburban life. I remembered a Christmas a few years back when she and Victor offered to host at their place. It sounded generous, but once I arrived, I realized I was more of a prop than a guest. They'd seated me at the far end of the table, where conversation died before it reached me. That was when Victor leaned in and said, almost proudly, "Linda's inheritance will set her up even better when the time comes." He'd said it like a business plan, not a family truth. And now, in this hospital, their intentions were laid bare. But betrayal has a way of waking the strategist in a man like me. I didn't build bridges for 40 years without learning how to balance weight, how to test stress points, how to reinforce what matters. And I had one reinforcement left. A man my children feared more than they feared disappointing me. Judge Alan Price. Alan and I had known each other since our 20s. He studied law while I studied engineering. Our lives diverged, but our friendship never wavered. Alan became a respected judge, known for his integrity and for his merciless dismantling of anyone who tried to cheat the system. Years ago, when Michael got tangled in a shady property deal, Alan's name came up in whispered tones. Michael had begged me not to let Alan get involved, knowing full well his schemes would collapse under Alan's scrutiny. And now, as I lay in that hospital bed, I realized Alan was exactly the man I needed. Not to scare them with threats, but to stand with me as proof that I wasn't alone, and that my affairs were no longer theirs to toy with. The next morning, I asked the nurse for my phone. With steady hands, I scrolled through my contacts until I found his number. It had been months since we spoke, but when Alan answered, his voice was warm, firm, and steady, just as I remembered. "Harold? What's happened?" I told him everything. The hospital, the silence, the whispers about inheritance. There was a pause, then a controlled fury in his tone. "They dared say that while you were lying in a hospital bed?" I chuckled bitterly. "They did. And I need your help, Alan. Not to fight them. To prepare." He didn't hesitate. "Say the word." "I'll come by," I ended the call with a calmness I hadn't felt since the day I was admitted. My children thought they were watching me fade. What they didn't realize was that they had just given me the reason to rise. That was the night my resentment became resolve. The next morning, a nurse wheeled me into the hospital courtyard to get some fresh air. The winter air bit at my cheeks, but it cleared my head. I sat there, wrapped in a blanket, watching my breath curl into the cold, and thought, if they see me as weak, let them. It will make what comes next all the sharper. True to his word, Alan arrived that afternoon. The sight of him, a tall, broad-shouldered man with silver hair and the posture of someone who'd carried authority his whole life, stirred something in me. He greeted me. With a firm handshake, his grip steady as iron. "Harold," he said, looking me over with a mixture of concern and admiration, "you've been through hell." I smiled faintly. Hell's quieter than I expected. At least down there, someone might actually show up. Alan's eyes hardened. "Tell me what you want me to do." We spent an hour talking through everything. My assets, the house Ruth and I had lived in for decades, modest investments, savings accounts. Nothing extravagant, but enough to tempt greed. I explained how Michael and Linda had kept their distance, their excuses piling up while they enjoyed parties, galas, and dinners. How Karen had muttered about inheritance sorting itself out. Alan listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening as I spoke. When I finished, he leaned forward. "You have options. The law gives you more power than they realize. If they think they can sit back and collect, they're mistaken." That night, Alan arranged for his colleague, my lawyer, Daniel, to visit the hospital. We updated my will quietly. I revoked Michael and Linda as primary beneficiaries. Instead, I placed everything in a protective trust that would only release funds to them under strict conditions: education for their children, health care emergencies, not a penny for luxuries. The rest I earmarked for a scholarship in Ruth's name, something I'd always dreamed of but never formalized. It was exhausting, but it gave me strength. Every signature I placed on those documents was a reminder that I wasn't powerless. My children had mistaken my silence for surrender. They'd soon learn it was strategy. 2 days later, I requested a family meeting. I asked Michael and Linda to come to the hospital cafeteria at noon. Predictably, they were late. Michael arrived with Karen. her heels clicking like gunshots across the tile. Linda swept in 15 minutes after that, her phone glued to her ear until she finally noticed me sitting at the table. "Dad, what's this about?" "I told you I had a lunch meeting," Linda said, sliding into the chair with impatience written all over her face. I looked at her, then at Michael. "I wanted to talk about your absence. About the fact that while I lay here, you were both otherwise occupied." Michael shifted uncomfortably. Karen didn't. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, eyes sharp. "Hospitals are depressing places, Harold. We thought it was best to give you space. Isn't that what you'd want?" "Space?" I repeated quietly. "Is that what you call it? When a father calls and is told he's a burden? When his children post photos of parties instead of spending 10 minutes by his bedside?" Linda rolled her eyes. "Dad, don't be dramatic. We're protecting our energy. You're not the only one with responsibilities." I felt a flicker of anger, but I smothered it. I had no intention of showing them the storm building inside me. Instead, I smiled faintly. "You're right. Perhaps I have been dramatic. Perhaps I expected too much." Michael exhaled, relieved. "Good, then we understand each other. Let's just focus on you getting discharged." "Of course," I said smoothly. "Let's focus on that." They thought they'd won. They thought my quiet tone meant retreat. Karen even smirked, as though she'd tamed a stubborn old man. But inside, I was already picturing the moment their faces would change, the moment they'd realize the inheritance they treated as their birthright was no longer theirs to claim freely. That night, lying in my hospital bed, I stared at the ceiling and whispered to Ruth, "You were right, my love. I gave too much. But now I'll give what's left to those who deserve it. And as for the ones who don't, they'll finally learn what it feels like to be left empty-handed." The first twist had landed, not with a confrontation, but with a signature. Quiet, precise, irreversible. Just like the bridges I used to design. Unseen foundations holding everything in place, while those above had no idea what kept them standing. When I was finally strong enough to walk the hospital halls without a nurse at my side, I felt the tension tighten around me like a noose. My children knew I'd be discharged soon, and with that came their renewed interest, not in my health, but in what I had waiting for me at home. The first confrontation came just 2 days before my release. Michael appeared unannounced, this time without Karen. He sat by my bed, restless, drumming his fingers against the rail. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine he'd come simply as a son, concerned for his father. "Dad," he began, lowering his voice, "we need to talk about the house." I kept my expression neutral. "What about it?" He leaned forward, eyes darting as though worried someone might overhear. "It's a lot for you to manage alone. The taxes, the upkeep. Wouldn't it be easier if I handled things? Just temporarily, of course. I could take care of the paperwork, make sure everything runs smoothly while you focus on recovery." There it was, the hook, baited and ready. "I can manage my own affairs," I said, calm but firm. "I built that house with my own 2 hands. I'll decide what happens to it." Michael's face hardened. "I'm just trying to help. Karen thinks it would be irresponsible not to prepare. What if something happened to you again?" I looked him in the eye. "Then it would be my decision to make, not yours." He didn't like that answer. His jaw clenched, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be, the one who pouted when told no. Only now the stakes weren't candy or car keys. They were my home, my legacy. The second confrontation came a day later, this time with Linda. She arrived in her tailored coat, hair perfectly styled, every inch the polished lawyer's wife. She carried a folder in her hand, which she laid on my bedside table like an offering. "Dad," she said with a practiced smile, Victor and I have been thinking. You shouldn't have to worry about financial stress during recovery. We could oversee your accounts, pay your bills, manage your investments. Just until you're fully back on your feet, I tapped the folder with one finger. And what's this? Power of attorney forms, she said smoothly. Simple, straightforward. It just makes sense. I studied her face, searching for the little girl who once begged me to braid her hair before school. All I saw was calculation, the same look I'd seen on Victor at that Christmas table years ago. I pushed the folder back across the table. Not while I can still hold a pen. Linda's smile faltered. Dad, you're being unreasonable. We're offering stability. You should be grateful. Grateful? I asked quietly. For what? For the daughter who couldn't spare 10 minutes to visit me when I thought I might not see another sunrise, or the son who treats my house like a prize to be claimed? Her cheeks flushed, but she recovered quickly, masking it with indignation. We're protecting your future. No, I said, my voice firm now. You're protecting your inheritance. The air went still between us. Linda stood abruptly, snatched the folder, and muttered, You'll regret this. Then she stormed out, heels echoing down the hallway. The third and fiercest confrontation came that evening, when Michael and Linda returned together, with Karen leading the charge. She stood at the foot of my bed, arms crossed, her voice sharp. Harold, this is ridiculous. You're being selfish. Think of the grandchildren. Don't you want to leave them something? All we're asking is to make sure it's managed responsibly. Michael and Linda flanked her, silent but watchful, waiting for me to bend. I reached for my cane, more for emphasis than balance, and tapped it against the floor. Listen to me carefully. If family is measured in signatures, not presents, if my worth is tied only to what I can hand you on paper, then you've already lost me. Michael's face reddened, his fists clenching. Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. Karen shook her head, muttering, Stubborn old man. I straightened, every ounce of my dignity gathered into those next words. I survived heart surgery without you. I'll survive life without you, too, if that's what it takes. They left in a flurry of frustration, their carefully rehearsed plans unraveling. I lay back against the pillows, exhausted but resolute. For the first time in days, the empty chair beside me didn't sting, because I no longer saw it as abandonment. I saw it as proof of who they really were. And with Alan by my side, the document signed and sealed, I knew the real storm was yet to come. Discharge day arrived on a Thursday morning, bright and cold. The nurses bustled in and out of my room, gathering paperwork, checking vitals, congratulating me on the progress I'd made. They were kind, kinder than my own blood, and when they hugged me goodbye, I felt the warmth of strangers where family should have been. I kept glancing at the door, though part of me already knew. I had sent both Michael and Linda a message the night before. I'm being discharged tomorrow at 10 a.m. Thought you'd want to know? No response. At 9:55, I sat on the edge of the bed, dressed in my old wool coat, cane in hand, heart steady. At 10:05, the nurse rolled up with a wheelchair, smiling softly. Anyone coming to pick you up, Mr. Bennett? I shook my head. No, but someone will meet me. And right on cue, Alan appeared in the doorway. His presence filled the room in a way my children's absence never could. Tall, imposing, but warm-eyed, he looked at me and said simply, Ready to go, Harold? More than ready, I replied. The nurse wheeled me down the corridor, Alan walking beside me, his stride calm and unhurried. I could feel eyes turning as we passed. Alan's reputation preceded him even here. He had presided over cases that made headlines in this town, dismantling fraudsters, crooked businessmen, and opportunists with the precision of a surgeon. We stopped at the hospital's front entrance. The doors slid open, letting in the crisp bite of winter air. Alan extended his hand and helped me rise from the chair. We stood side by side as a hospital orderly who happened to be passing by offered to snap a photo for us. Alan placed a steady hand on my shoulder, and I lifted my cane proudly, not as a crutch, but as a statement. I was still standing. The photo captured it perfectly. Me, newly discharged, not flanked by my children, but by the one man they feared most. Once Alan drove me home, I pulled out my phone and opened the family group chat. My hands didn't tremble, my chest didn't ache. I simply attached the photo, typed 6 words, and pressed send. "Thank you for being too busy." And underneath, I added, "Alan made time." For the first time since my surgery, I felt a peace settle over me. The reactions came swiftly. First, Michael's typing bubbles appeared, then vanished, then reappeared. Finally, a message. "Dad, why is Alan there? What's going on?" Linda chimed in almost immediately. "Why would you bring him into this? We could have handled things privately." Their panic bled through the screen. They didn't fear for me. They feared what Alan's presence meant. They knew Alan had a reputation for fairness, so sharp it cut through any entitlement. They knew if he was standing beside me, their chances of manipulating me, or my estate, were gone. Karen finally jumped in, her words venomous. "This is humiliating. Do you want people to think you don't trust your own children? Alan doesn't belong in family matters." I stared at the screen, then set the phone down without replying. For once, silence was my answer. Alan, sitting across from me in my living room, raised an eyebrow. "They're rattled." "Good," I said. "Let them stew. They wanted to keep their distance. Now they'll understand what distance really costs." That evening, Michael called. His voice was unsteady, trying to sound calm but fraying at the edges. "Dad, we need to talk." "Why involve Alan? Why send that photo? You made us look like we abandoned you." I let the silence hang, then said evenly, "Did I? Or did you abandon me long before I sent that photo?" He had no reply, just heavy breathing, followed by a muttered, "We'll come over tomorrow." I ended the call with a steady hand. For years I had been the father who bent, who gave, who made excuses for their neglect. But that day, standing outside the hospital with Alan at my side, I felt the shift. The power was no longer theirs to wield. They couldn't guilt me, corner me, or press me into signing away what I'd built. The second twist had landed. Not just a photo, not just Alan's presence, but the knowledge that I had already locked every door they thought they could walk through. The trust was airtight, the will rewritten, the legacy secure. And tomorrow, when they walked into my house full of anger and fear, I would finally show them that I was not the weak man they believed me to be. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was still, the kind of silence that once gnawed at me, but now steadied me. I brewed a pot of coffee, set out 2 mugs, one for myself, one for Alan, who had insisted on staying over in case things got interesting, and waited. At 9 sharp, the sound of tires crunching on gravel broke the quiet. Through the window I saw Michael's SUV pull up, followed closely by Linda's sleek sedan. They didn't come empty-handed. Both carried folders under their arms like soldiers marching into battle. And at the front of the line was Karen, heels stabbing into the ground as though the earth itself had insulted her. I opened the door before they could knock. "Come in," I said evenly, stepping aside. The air in the living room thickened the moment they entered. Michael didn't bother with pleasantries. "Dad, what's this about? Why is Judge Price involved in family matters?" Alan, seated comfortably in the armchair, didn't move. He simply folded his hands, his presence filling the room. "Because your father asked me to be," Karen sneered. "This isn't legal business. This is family." Alan's voice was calm, but carried an edge. Inheritance, property, and financial trusts are legal business, and your father has every right to involve counsel, especially when he feels pressured. Michael flushed, his eyes darting between Alan and me. Dad, this is going too far. We're your children. We should be the ones you trust to handle things. I leaned forward, cane resting across my knees. Trust? You? Couldn't even handle visiting me in the hospital. Tell me, Michael, tell me, Linda, when exactly did I stop being your father and start being a wallet? Linda's face crumpled into practiced indignation. That's unfair. We were busy. You know how demanding life is. I slammed the cane down against the hardwood, the sound sharp as a gunshot. Busy posting parties and galas while I lay alone in a hospital bed? Busy whispering about how the inheritance will sort itself out? Don't lie to me. I heard you. Silence fell. Michael shifted uncomfortably, but Karen filled the gap, her voice dripping with disdain. You're twisting things. We only wanted to make sure everything was prepared. You're not getting any younger. Harold Allen raised an eyebrow. Careful, Mrs. Bennett. That sounded an awful lot like coercion. Karen's mouth snapped shut, but her glare could have cut glass. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out a folder, thicker than the ones they'd carried. I laid it on the coffee table and slid it toward them. You wanted clarity? Here it is, my estate, my accounts, my home, all placed in a trust, controlled by conditions you cannot manipulate. And, overseen by Alan himself, Michael grabbed the folder, flipping through pages, his face draining of color as the words registered. Linda leaned over his shoulder, her manicured hand gripping the paper so tightly it crinkled. This isn't fair, Linda stammered. We're your children. We deserve— You deserve? I cut in, my voice low but steady. What you deserve, Linda, is measured by how you treated me when I needed you. And you showed me that your time, your presence, your love could be bartered away for convenience. That's what you earned. Michael slammed the folder shut, his voice rising. You can't do this, Dad. You're being manipulated. He pointed an accusing finger at Alan. This is his doing. Alan didn't flinch. Your father came to me, not the other way around. And unlike the both of you, I showed up when he needed someone. Karen snapped, You're destroying your family over paperwork. I rose slowly, leaning on my cane, standing tall despite the ache in my chest. No, Karen. The family destroyed itself the moment my children decided I wasn't worth an hour of their time in the hospital. The paperwork simply makes sure their betrayal doesn't outlive me. The words hung heavy, final. Michael's face turned crimson, Linda's eyes filled with frustrated tears, and Karen muttered curses under her breath. But none of it moved me. Finally, I said, Get out. Michael blinked. What? You heard me? This is my home, and until you learn what family truly means, you're not welcome here. For a moment I thought Michael might defy me. His fists clenched, his body tense. But then he saw Alan rise slowly from the armchair, his gaze sharp as steel, and he faltered. With a strangled grunt, he stormed toward the door. Linda followed, her head bowed, and Karen's heels clicked in furious rhythm as she spat, You'll regret this, Harold. The door slammed shut behind them. I sank back into my chair, exhausted but strangely lighter. Alan poured me a cup of coffee, his calm presence a balm against the storm. You did what needed to be done, he said quietly. I nodded. For the first time in years, Alan, I feel like I'm standing on solid ground again. The decisive resolution had come, not in anger, but in clarity. My children had tried to claim power through neglect, through pressure, through entitlement. But in the end, I took it back. and they would live with the consequences. The house was quiet after they left, the kind of quiet that once gnawed at me but now felt like peace. I sat there for a long while, hands wrapped around the warm coffee mug Alan had poured, listening to the ticking of the old wall clock Ruth had bought years ago. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, I wasn't waiting for anyone to show up. I thought about the empty chair in my hospital room, how it had stood as a symbol of their absence, of my foolish hope that they'd come through the door with smiles and concern. Now, I realized that chair had taught me more than their presence ever could. It had shown me the truth. Love without action is just a word. And when family reduces you to a signature on paper, the bonds are already broken. Alan stayed until evening, refusing to let me spend the day alone. We talked about Ruth, about the early days of our careers, about the mistakes we'd made as fathers, and the things we'd done right. He told me, "Harold, you're not the first man to be betrayed by blood, and you won't be the last. But most don't get the chance to answer it on their own terms." His words settled in me like a final stone in a bridge arch, everything suddenly holding together. That weekend, neighbors stopped by with casseroles and warm smiles. They had heard about my surgery and wanted to check in. These were people who owed me nothing, who shared no last name with me, yet they came willingly. They filled the house with chatter and kindness my children hadn't bothered to offer. One little boy from next door handed me a hand-drawn "Get Well Soon" card, and it nearly broke me in ways Michael and Linda's neglect hadn't. A week later, I attended church for the first time since Ruth's passing. Sitting in that pew, surrounded by familiar faces, I realized I wasn't as alone as I had feared. Legacy isn't measured only in bloodlines, it's in the lives you touch, the respect you earn, the love you give freely and wisely. Michael and Linda tried, of course, to claw back what they'd lost. I received curt emails from Victor filled with legal jargon, attempts to contest the trust. But Alan and Daniel had built the protections airtight. Every attempt fell flat. Eventually, their messages dwindled into silence. Karen, however, couldn't resist one final jab. She left a voicemail, her voice dripping with venom. "You've made a fool of yourself, Harold. Everyone knows you cut out your own children. When you're gone, no one will even remember you." I listened once, then deleted it. Because she was wrong. My name would be remembered, not as the father who bent under pressure, but as the man who stood up when it mattered most. I often find myself in the study at night, looking through Ruth's old albums, pictures of family vacations, birthdays, Sunday dinners when the children were still small and their laughter filled the house. I don't regret those years. I gave what I could and I loved as best I knew how. But I no longer confuse the past with the present. The people my children have become are not the ones in those photographs. And so, I've chosen to invest what remains of my years differently. The scholarship fund in Ruth's name is underway, designed to help young engineers who, like me, came from modest beginnings. Knowing that my work, our sacrifices, will lift someone else long after I'm gone gives me a sense of peace my children could never provide. Some nights, I still wonder if Michael or Linda will ever see beyond their greed, if they'll remember me not as the obstacle to their ambitions, but as the man who raised them, loved them, and asked for so little in return. But whether they do or not, the outcome is the same. My legacy is protected, my dignity intact. I began this journey lying in a hospital bed, staring at an empty chair, believing I had lost everything that mattered. But in the end, I gained clarity. I learned that betrayal does not define you. Your response to it does. They left me alone when I needed them most. In the end, I left them alone too, but this time by choice. By choice. By choice. By choice.